Welcome, YouTube watchers and Formula One fans alike. My name is Eric. This is R Squared Racing, and this is our third episode to use artificial intelligence in order to predict Formula One outcomes. And yes, we are the only channel actually relying on artificial intelligence to tell you that Mercedes is probably going to win this weekend. But that aside, if you want to continue on listening, we will get started with some news, and I want to talk about two particular big pieces of news that are coming up as we're rolling into the end of the year. And the very first one is that it actually came out that Formula One is planning to retain their hybrid engine for the years to come. When it comes time for the engine update in a couple of years' time, they're talking about actually continuing the hybrid era and this time investing in sustainable fuels. So they are staying away from electrification and hydrogen and everything else that people are talking about to say, hey, there is a way for people that have their current cars, this immense infrastructure of people using their cars to be able to continue that and keep that going. Now, where I just wanted to put a small note in there, feel free to write to Formula One, feel free to complain to Formula One if you think like I do. I think this is a terrible waste because while I agree with the concept of sustainable fuels, I think the execution is simply terrible because everyone in Formula One, you talk to any driver in the paddock, you talk to anyone there, has been talking about the issue with weight. So if you're going to go for sustainable fuels, I'm 100% for it. I think it's a fantastic thing to consider, but drop the freaking electric engine. Either go one way or another, but stick with that because you can probably go back to making these cars incredibly lighter. And in this world where we're cutting down downforce, if we can cut down the weight as well, I think that there will be a tremendous benefit to the spectacle of racing, closer racing, better opportunities, and just run an engine on sustainable fuels for all the power you can make with it. And I think we would really have a fantastic thing there. Just drop the hybrid engine for all it's worth. It's just too much complexity. It runs costs way too high, especially with the financial cap. Drop the electric motor. It just makes sense if you're going to go with it. Either go with an electric motor and no internal combustion engine, or go with the internal combustion engine, but I will leave it at that. As we're entering in this last triple header, we have recently found out the F1 calendar for the next year, and they are planning for tons of extra triple headers. So, there's a lot of there's being talked about in terms of updating the calendar formats or the weekend formats and all of these items. So I think that the next year is really going to be an interesting way to see how teams are going to adapt to that. There's conversation about perhaps people being remote because there is a massive toll that's taken on the track side. So team, and I think that they will start to see some changes, or maybe in 2021, we'll start to see people trying different things to see if there's a way that they can cope. However, it does seem a little ridiculous because you'd imagine that you'd catch up with a lot more information by actually being there, that sometimes there are things that is just not in the data, or you're able to connect the data points better by being there and seeing something, whether it's, the flow vis off a car that you're seeing because it's stripping. I don't know, but I'm curious to see how that's going to work out. Let's just leave it at that. Now, I'm not going to go into too much of the driver market. I don't think anything's going to happen anytime soon, or if it does, whatever the case, it's not what we're here to get focused on. So let's go ahead and get started with some track analysis. And there are a lot of changes actually this time around as we are evolving this small little project that is getting quite a bit of attention. Now, first and foremost, I want to give a big shout out to the Motorsport Engineer Network. If you guys have not checked it out, they have actually a free course on their academy. I actually went through it over the past couple of weeks, and I thought it was really interesting. If you want to get a glimpse of what it's like to work at Formula One, and their course actually covers the day in the life at the Mercedes Petronas AMG F1 team, which is actually kind of interesting. I highly suggest you check it out, and I'll include the link to it below. But we are here to talk about Bahrain, and actually this time around, if we look at Bahrain, we're finally at a circuit where we can use artificial intelligence in past history and a lot of rich past history to start making some predictions. Whereas in the past two episodes, we're talking about circuits that we never raced or we haven't raced in almost 10 years. So really, this is the first time that we get a chance of actually putting a lot more data in the mix and hopefully using artificial intelligence to come up with a decent prediction. And yes, I've said it before, I'll say it again. Yes, Mercedes is predicted to win. There is no amount of artificial intelligence in the world that will probably tell you otherwise presently, but let's go ahead and keep working on these models as we go. So first and foremost, Bahrain is a very particular track. So I just want to go ahead and add in just the asphalt abrasion alone. By just putting an asphalt abrasion of 4, where they're ranked at a 5, you see that immediately the data starts showing that you're only down to 3 circuits, which is Mugello, Bahrain, and Spa-Francorchamps, which I completely butchered that. I'm not going to bother to edit that out, but next time around, I promise I'll try to practice at least once before doing this. Now, looking at the information here, even comparing these 3 circuits, Bahrain is significantly different. It has a higher asphalt abrasion. The lateral load is a lot less in comparison to a circuit like Spa. You have a lot less tire stress than other tracks. So you're going to look at a couple of different interesting strategies, especially because it's at nighttime, that you may look into one-stop strategies here. So we'll look into a couple of that information, but as our partners with Motorsport Engineer, they have been kind enough to provide a lot of access to Formula One engineers that are helping us validate this data, giving us exciting information to start looking into. So this is very much a project that is continuously undergoing a lot of upgrades. So we're trying to look into more data points that are more relevant based on Formula One engineer experience. I've spoken to a handful of them so far, and it's been really, really exciting because every time I leave a conversation, there is just more things that we could potentially look at it in a different way. So we're calling 2020 for a warm-up season. Hopefully by 2021, we will get a lot of exciting things. But we are putting together our score models. So the Motorsport Engineer score models for the constructor clearly puts Mercedes at an advantage here. Ferrari and Red Bull historically have been very close at this track. We'll see how this plays out. But in a driver score, Vettel's past history does show here and does put him at a higher score. Bottas and Albon actually have had decent scores here in the past as well. So a lot of interesting things going on, but it is a weekend of Hamilton and Mercedes, and there's just no way to slice that data otherwise. So looking at it here, we want to bring it up. Looking at the track in particular, let's bring out Bahrain here and look specifically at Bahrain. Once we bring that in, we see that Bahrain does have a 33% chance of a safety car probability based on the data that we have. So we're running safety car data from 2016 onwards. So we do put it at a medium chance that a safety car could come out. It is a big track. There is a lot of runoff. So you won't see a lot of collisions that may lead to safety cars, but there is a decent probability that it will happen. So average pit stops here, we're looking at 2 stops in average, but if we do trend that, we do see that number has gone recently low. So if a safety car comes out, you could see people opt for that 1-stop strategy and go long on the hard tire. Now, collision DNF rate is fairly low here. Again, with a lot of runoff, there is a lot of places for drivers to go. So safety car induced collisions will probably won't be something that we're going to be looking at, to be quite frank, but it could potentially happen. I mean, at this point, we'll see how that goes. And then the final piece here is that historically, if we look at an average pit stop delta, we're looking at an average pit stop delta of 22 seconds. I've seen places that list this as high as 25, but according to some of the pit stop data that we're bringing in, 22 to 25 seconds is one of the considerations, which is fairly low. If you look at places, I believe, like Suzuka or Russia, you're looking at a 30-second pit stop delta. So you do lose a lot more time there. So in this scenario, you can probably opt for a 2-stop strategy if it works out where you don't lose so much time in the pits. More to it than that then is also the consideration of a safety car. So if a safety car comes out, that could drastically change how you look at your strategy. But again, that could play out in tons of different ways, but this is it for your track analysis. Now, I want to go ahead and switch gears a little bit to a new segment that we're putting together, which is AI predictions. So for those that have watched the past videos, this is an entirely new thing that we've been putting together. And again, with the effort of a lot of Formula One engineers, as well as statisticians that have been working with us, and also experts that have been putting together, helping us put together a lot of this data. And a really big shout out for them, but I want to quickly explain the rules, and we may do a bigger video on how all of that's going about. So there are 4 things that we are now predicting. 4. We are predicting qualifying results. We are predicting race results. We are predicting DNFs, and we are predicting the fastest lap. We are predicting those 4 criterias, and those models are, in, let's just say, an ongoing development to be able to fine tune and refine. So what we're looking to do is that we're looking to take an in-depth analysis into artificial intelligence, and there's actually a great article that just came out on AWS's AI, and funny enough, we're not that far from our methodology, although they're looking at different things to predict, such as qualifying gaps, which we are not there, but certainly there's a lot that we can look at and perhaps do a video on the comparison of the two. But we're using a lot of the same methodologies to get there, which is actually kind of exciting and validates what we are trying to do. So let's start with qualifying and trying to talk a little bit about the surprises here. There isn't any on the leftmost column. You can see the top 3 in qualifying are looking at Hamilton, Bottas, and Verstappen. I did want to look into a comparison, which I don't have time for this race, but maybe something for next year, which is the performance of the title winner for the remainder of the races. I've seen several cases from memory, and I wanted to take an opportunity to look back at the data into whether the performance declines and whether we can show in the data that a driver's performance declines once he clinches the title. Did not get an opportunity to do that. If we can in the coming weeks, we certainly will, but if not, maybe be a topic for next year. But looking at the data right now, Hamilton is the person that's going to be sitting at that pole position and sharing the first row with Bottas. The Mercedes dominations continues. But exciting things to talk about is that the increase in pace that Ferrari has experienced over the last couple of races has put Leclerc in 4th position. So a couple of interesting notes there. And if we're looking at the battle for the top, or for the top, the B-class top, which is the battle between Racing Point, McLaren, Renault, and now Ferrari as of the last race. It's tough to believe that if you would have bet money that Ferrari would have been the team that had scored the most points on a race weekend in Turkey, I think you would have made a lot of money. But because of that, now Ferrari is also in this battle, and if Leclerc qualifies 4th, he will definitely be putting his foot forward to fight for that 3rd place. And remember, it's millions of dollars at stake. So Paris is coming in at 5th. So we're looking at quite a bit here. We looked at Renault, seems to be the team that's going to struggle out of everyone here. And Vettel's performance this year is not giving him any bigger edge. Hopefully he gets a little bit of his swag back for the final races with a great performance and be able to make it to the podium at Turkey. But this time, no wet weather conditions, so it'll be a little bit tougher. I can imagine Ferrari is already calling the wet trucks, the water trucks, to come and spray some water down to give them a little bit of a chance, kind of like Lancia did it, in the 80s for their rally. So highly recommend you look at the Grand Tour video for that. But anywho, so here's the information that we're looking at for the qualifying. Now let's take it to the race. And we're going to talk a little bit about the race. You see here, if you are an avid viewer, that there are only 14 names here. That is because we are predicting some DNFs, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But everything remaining as is, we're not looking at any surprises for the podium. The podium, once again, we're looking at Hamilton, Bottas, and Verstappen. Artificial intelligence claims that Leclerc and Perez are going to come right behind the podium. And the interesting piece is that Stroll will work his way up to 6th. So there's a lot of data that is supporting the resurgence of Racing Point at a track like Bahrain, considering their performance in similar tracks. Vettel is also predicted to have a decent race, which certainly his past history here would show that he is looking strong for a decent finish. Now, once we're looking into the results, another interesting thing is that some artificial intelligence predicts that Kvyat will actually outperform Gasly for this race. So something interesting to take a look at. And if we are looking now, and this is still a little bit under construction, but the DNFs that are predicted for this race, the big ones are Grosjean, Ocon, and Norris. So there are a couple of others in there that we're talking about, but these are the ones that I wanted to highlight. So yes, Ocon and Norris on the battle for the 3rd place. If those two do DNF, it'll be a tragedy for that battle for 3rd place, because at this point, every point counts. And if we're looking at a fastest lap prediction, Valtteri is the one that is actually predicted to get the fastest lap. Now, we're going to do a video later on about all of this and how and what different criteria we're looking at in order to look at a DNF prediction and a fastest lap prediction. And there's certainly a lot that we are still looking to improve on, which is why, big disclaimer that this is under construction. So, final piece here that we want to just quickly cover. If we want to look also at comparisons by constructors, we can do that here, which is something that will be coming up in future videos. But if we take a look at Ferrari, we can kind of take a close look and we can see how their gap to mostly Hamilton, how their gap to Mercedes has been coming down, which is interesting to support their race theory. At the same time, if we look at race caps, the Ferrari as a whole or the individual drivers, you can see how their race caps are also getting closer and closer and closer. So there's a lot of interesting news here for the Ferrari fans, because I genuinely think that Ferrari might be onto something in their fight back at this point for 2021. So a lot of interesting things going on. And as Binotto said, they only get one shot for the next engine change. So they're working very hard, and I'm sure I'm optimistic about what Ferrari can bring to the table for 2021. Let's get into some fantasy predictions now. If you are a fantasy Formula One player, let's go ahead and get started. And now we have updated a lot of the logic. How we mentioned that we're using our 4 predictions now. Now we're applying that here as well to calculate the number of points that one can score. So getting into the standard 105, and I have not looked at this before the call, before the meeting, but the meeting, work is on my mind. But before this recording, you can see that there is a lot of DNF risk in this week's strategies. And one of the big pieces that's leading to that is the fact that a lot of people are on the hook for penalty points, and they have been doing so for the past several races. So those power unit components are struggling. And there is a lot that's on the table because, again, so many teams are fighting for 3rd place. So taking a grid penalty might not be advisable. So they're probably going to try to run these engines to the very, very end of what they can do. And I am willing to expect a lot of DNFs in this final triple header. That is my big headline or my big prediction headline for the upcoming triple header. Fantasy Formula One, this time, if you're a big player, there is a lot to look forward to. We're looking here now for a budget of 105 million, which I believe most teams at this point can go for. Now, the max predicted points for this weekend is 218. Remember that Hamilton is on a race and qualifying streak. So if you have a mega driver left, that is the strategy to go with. So putting that aside, one of the interesting things is that the path to 218 follows 2 very separate strategies. If you're following your constructor strategy, where you have Mercedes as your constructor, then you are there for 218 points. Equally in DNF risk, you can take the strategy of using the racing point constructor to free up some budget and use Verstappen as your second driver. And at that point, you can probably reach that. And this might be a good strategy if you somehow don't have 105 million in your budget at this stage. So some interesting things to consider. If you are looking at Mercedes, let's take a look here. We see a couple of easier strategies. If you can probably get to 215 under the predictions using Grosjean, Hamilton, Kvyat, Sainz, and Perez. Again, Kvyat is predicted to outperform Gasly this time around, so probably getting a couple of extra points there. As you can see, Perez is consistently looking to be the turbo driver because he is predicted to do better than anybody else in the under 20 million budget. So a couple of things to keep in mind there, but if you are a big Perez fan, do keep him as your turbo driver. If you're looking for an alternative on your turbo driver, perhaps look at someone like Sainz because he's predicted to do well and finish this race. So if you're looking at a Sainz as a turbo driver, your predicted points come down a little bit, but you can probably fit in a couple of strategies with Hamilton, Stroll, Perez, Russell, and Sainz, switching that around. If you want to try to avoid Perez, it is tough to find a combination here that does so. You'll see Perez all across the board just because, again, being predicted he's going to finish fifth, numbers change dramatically once you start eliminating Perez. If you want to eliminate Perez, you can run for 104.7, Grosjean, Hamilton, Stroll, Raikkonen, Sainz, and over here, again, at a decently high risk, again at a 49, just edging the change of color there, you can probably run that combination if you're again doing a full Mercedes lineup. Now, if we're going to try to look for a low DNF risk strategy here, and I just cannot find anything that is low strategy at this point, but you can probably run for 32% DNF risk collectively. You can probably look into Grosjean, Hamilton, Kvyat, Norris, and Perez. I can tell you that Norris is the one that's bringing that number up way high for this. But essentially, that's probably to say that there is a very strong belief, according to artificial intelligence, that Grosjean, Hamilton, Kvyat, and Perez will actually survive the upcoming round. So a lot of it there. And I want to quickly finalize this conversation with a talk about, is more money more better? And if you are at a let's just go ahead and we have in all of the constructors, we have in all of our turbo drivers. If you have 110, then you can see with 110 million in budget that you really don't get a lot more points, but you do get a couple of different options. So at this point, for 109, you can do 222. Actually, for 105.1, you can do 222 points. At a decent risk, but look here, we can do a 220 with Grosjean, Hamilton, Norris, Sainz, and Perez for 107.7 at a 36.7% risk. Or if you really believe that Ricciardo may make the difference, you can actually run Mercedes, Hamilton, Ricciardo, and Sainz, and Perez for predicted 219 at 109.4, and this might be a decent combination for anyone that is looking at that. Now I'm going to shoot for the moon, and let's take a look. If you're at 115, you can actually hit 231. I hadn't looked at this one before. By adding in Leclerc, you can pull Hamilton, Leclerc, Stroll, Perez. All of them predicted to finish. All of them predicted to finish very high. There is a decent DNF risk here, but you can pull it off with 113.3 and make your decisions based on this. Again, this is a work in progress model. Please do not take us too seriously, so to say, and rely on your judgment. But the final piece that I want to talk about here, again, penalty points. we are coming down to the wire with regards to the season, which means everyone's hung up. This is as of the Turkish Championship, and I have highlighted Pierre Gasly and George Russell because they have changed power units at the Turkish Grand Prix, so they are already in the 4 mark here. So as we're looking into all these numbers, just some things to be kept in mind, that these guys are already hitting the limits. So George Russell at this point might be a good pick for your fantasy teams because he has nothing to lose by starting at the back of the grid. So he for sure will probably be taking some penalty points, which won't affect your fantasy teams. And if he can make up any positions, you're going to be in good shape. So that's it for this week's predictions. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Please, if you like the new format, if you like the new information, feel free to put some comments down below. As always, thank you to the Motorsport Engineer Network. Thank you to everyone that's been dedicating time and providing us some feedback for this. Seems like it's being well received, and if it continues to do so, we will continue to put these videos together. Until the next time, my name's Eric. This is R Squared Racing. So long.